Welcome back to Headlines and Beyond. And I say welcome back because on iNN here, that's the Internet News Network, we did a test run in 2012, and then we took a break to go back and look at what we did and try to bring back a better product, a better news choice than what you have out there in, standard. If you look at most of the news choices, there's a lot of bias in there. There's a lot of information that's missing. They don't tell you everything. And the thing is, you can hear this from a variety of different sources. You can see how often, that we're lied to by the media. And rather than going into a rant about this, the best way to go about doing this is take the research approach and figure out what's wrong and what's being hidden. And so, if you're interested in politics, particularly interested in geopolitics, well, we're coming back now. We're now back on a regular basis, and we will be here on the weekends, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Plus, we'll also be developing documentaries as well. So, I hope you enjoy. You'll join us on Tuesday, Thursdays, and weekends for Headlines and Beyond. This is the beginning. This is our reintroduction to iNN here. This is the one particular thing is that we're not going to be doing the headlines every single day because it's not an issue that we need to be repeating this stuff over and over again. And there's a lot of repetition in the news, and there's not everything. There isn't enough to fill a 24-hour day of news. To do 24/7, there's simply not enough material out there there's not enough happening out there all the time to do that. And rather what we'll be doing here is that you'll be having the headlines, but you'll also be having documentaries. We'll be looking at history. We'll be looking at the reality versus rhetoric. We'll be doing a lot of analysis here that is very simply not done on other news channels. And we will be looking at other different broadcasts, other sources. We'll be analyzing the other sources for their content, for how they approach things. And what we will be doing is aiming towards a 2015 official launch. That's what we intend to officially launch. This will sort of be the introduction, and then 2015, if we've done enough work, we'll have an official launch. Right now, if you notice at the beginning of the show, there's no opening theme. Well, we don't have one just yet. We're still working on it. So this show is going to be a show in progress, and because this is about journalism, and journalism in many ways is research-oriented, basically library work. It is not necessarily as glamorous as you would think it is. I'm approaching it from the research perspective. In research science, you leave your notes open. You don't edit things. You don't edit mistakes out. You leave your mistakes in there, and you simply know, okay, back here I made a mistake there. And that gives you an opportunity when people see you broadcast to say, oh, this isn't edited. Why aren't you editing this? Well, because this is journalism notes. You want to see the raw notes. You want to see what's behind the scenes. You want to get to know what the person is, what their motivation is for saying what they're saying. And you can't do that if something's edited. When something's edited, for whatever reason, you always wonder, well, why did you edit this? Are you hiding something from me? Is there something you don't want me to see? And the thing is, so in this case here, when we're talking about honesty in research and in journalism, the best sort of rule of thumb, if you want to be open about things, if you want to be going in and doing analysis, is that you have to be open, and you have to open yourself up. You have to be, in many ways, uncensored, raw. And this is how we're going to approach this. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to show you how that news reflects history, and history is well within the news. That there is a historical context when you're seeing something on the news. There's a historical context. I mean, if you look at what's going on now in Ukraine. This has been going on since 800 AD. The issue that's going on in the Ukraine right now has been going on since 800 AD. And who's one of the major players in this? The Vatican. Yeah, the papacy. The papacy has had a military army, has been involved militarily since its inception. And the thing is, the papacy, when I'm talking about the papacy here, I'm talking about the Western Christian Church. And a lot of Western Christians go, he's attacking Christianity. No, I'm not attacking Christianity, because the Western Christian church is not fundamentally Christian. Say, whoa, well, how can you say that? They're not fundamentally Christian. Look, go back and read the Gospel of Christ. Go back and read, some of these, the earlier versions of things, and you'll see that the Western church has been busy reinterpreting things, and you have a variety of retranslations of the Bible. Well, why do you need a retranslation? If you're a researcher and you're reading the Bible, why do you need a retranslation of things? Well, because things get misunderstood, but you see is that every translation, not only do you have a translation, but you have interpretation as well. You're, in other words, they're not simply saying what the person said, but they're saying what they think the person should have said. In other words, you have translators translating with very specific purposes, very specific reasons for translating, and their biases, their opinions get into the translation. And it's hard not to sort of do this because you, in many cases, translate from your own experience, from your own knowledge. It's a very personal part to do translation in terms of how you do translation. And one of the things that people miss often a lot when they do translation, you can say, oh yeah, I know, I can look up in the dictionary and there's what the word means, and and the other thing, you can't do that. You can do, even if you don't know the language, you can do translation because it's mostly dictionary work. And as long as you can do research in a dictionary, you can do translation. But what you're missing from that context is, yeah, you're translating the word that are there, but you don't necessarily understand the context in which it was written in. And that's what's missing from a lot of translations, and this is why in many cases you do get interpretation in there. And when you look back at the history of the Christian church, you'll find that prior to 1000 AD, the church was fundamentally different. There was a fundamental shift at 1000 AD. And the 1000 AD is really the emerging point for European Christianity, and that European Christianity, well, it has the face of Christianity. If you go underneath, you scrape the surface, you go beyond the surface, you want to see what's behind there, and you'll find paganism. You'll find the old Roman gods back there, and that's why you'll see in the Sistine Chapel, you'll see on a God the Father painted almost as Zeus. They have Zeus-like appearance. Well, why is this? Why do you have a Roman God figure in the Christian church? It's very simple, because the Christian church, the Western Christian church, is not Christian. It's really pagan. It's a rehashing of the pagan ideas. But they couldn't keep it as pagan, so they used a Christian facade. And if you go back to the original Christian church, which was an Eastern church, it wasn't a Western church, you'll find things are fundamentally different. But the thing is, in order for the Western church to exist, it had to wipe out and completely obliterate the Eastern church. And so what do you see in the Ukraine? You see in the Ukraine, in all these areas, you'll see a very Western edge to this conflict, where they need to wipe out the Slavs. And you'll see this in the Nazi propaganda, is that not only are they against the Jews, but they're also against the Slavs. Why are they against the Slavs? Simple. When the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire ended, the Roman Empire did not go to the west as the Europeans would have liked. It went to the Slavs. It went to Prince Vladimir, to the Russians. And where was Prince Vladimir centered in? He was centered in Russia was centered in Kiev. Kiev is now Ukraine. So what's happened is you have a successful attack, if you will, by the Germans on the Slavs in revenge, in avenging their loss of the Roman Empire. In other words, by the time the Roman Empire got to them in the 800 AD with Emperor Charlemagne, the empire was in tatters. It was completely destroyed. They didn't. So the Holy Roman Empire, as it was termed, was neither holy nor Roman. And it wasn't a whole empire. It was just bits and pieces, fragments, and it was primarily restricted to the West. And so what you add out of that is you have the Crusades, right? The Crusades, the papacy created an army to go out and gather, and then the papacy at this time was Germanic, and to try and form a stable European empire. And that was quote unquote Christian. But to do this, to send out these armies, they had to fundamentally rewrite Christianity, because Christianity was not a violent religion. It was against violence. That the first Christians who were martyred in the hippodromes, the Roman circuses, are proof of this. They didn't go to their death violently. They didn't go kicking and screaming and blowing people up. They went peacefully to their death. They went as Christians to their death. And the thing is, you can't have that and have a Christian army at the same time. They're contradictory. You can't have a Christian army in many respects, because Christians are not supposed to be violent. And so you see that there is a lot of history, even in the Ukrainian conflict, that is not brought out by mainstream media. I mean, a lot of the stuff, the historical context, and if you understand the historical context, you'll begin to understand how the mainstream media really is more about rhetoric. It's about political PR than it is about anything else. And so to start things off, we are going to get into our first segment. We're going to get into our first segment of headlines, and that means we'll be right back within a few minutes with our first set of headlines, and this will give you an idea of where we will be going with our broadcasts, the type of content that's going to be in here, and so on and so forth. All right, see you in a few minutes in the next segment. All right, take it easy.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Well, welcome back to the first segment of Headlines and Beyond on iNN. My name is Dr. Daniel Karras, and I am going to be your host. Our first set of headlines will begin within the first 2 weeks of, actually, we'll concentrate on the first week of November, and the first week in November were the U.S. Midterm elections, particularly on November 4th. This is when constitutionally the United States holds its elections. Midterm elections are not the primary general elections where you elect a president, but what they've done is they've given the Congress members a 2-year term, and so you get a chance every 2 years to go to the poll and sort of speak your mind. And the United States, unlike most of Europe, instead of being socialist, they're more of an individualist type of democracy. Excuse me, a democracy. And this creates a bit of complication, because you have a lot of the political influences that want to sort of keep control over things, and so you have a battle between your independents and the people who want control. And this is something that is and can be rather contemptuous. You could have very nasty races, and since the 1990s, that's exactly what's been happening. And so what happens is that each side likes to call each other evil. Each side has its own points. And what you end up trying to do is that if you look at what's going on in the media, you actually are quite misled by these different things. Because you do have the different sides, and each side tries to present itself in the media as being good, as being the good side. But there is a specific problem, and that is that politicians and publicans historically have been fundamentally evil. Your origins of evil come from politicians. You know, your monarchs, the public figures, and the publicans, the people who serve as government employees. Your bureaucracy has been fundamentally evil. And you can actually point to this biblically. Biblically, you can say that politicians and publicans, the bureaucracy of government, is biblically evil. And where do I point to this? I point to Luke chapter 18, verses 9 to 14. This is the parable of the publican and the Pharisee. And what you see here is you see The publican is basically your tax collector. He's your average government employee. And these people are given authority by the government to go in and collect taxes. And the thing is, they're given blank authority on these things. And so they go in and take whatever they want, including people. And of course, these people they've been murderers, they've been rapists, and they steal from people, and they leave people destitute and hungry. And they're rather, to put it mildly, evil. And so, in this period of time, they're looked down upon by a group of Jewish authority known as the Pharisee. The Pharisee are your upper levels of society in terms of your ranking in society. They are your upstanding church members. They go to temple regularly. They give to the poor. They tithe. They say their prayers. They do their fasting. They do all the rules that are required of them in the Jewish law. And Jews do have law, that there is a Jewish law outside of the civil law. And Jews are required, if you want to think about Judaism, Jews are actually required, if you are an Orthodox Jew, in other words, you haven't altered your Judaism. If you haven't altered your Judaism, you're required by Jewish law to observe the Jewish law above and beyond civil law. In other words, your Jewish law comes first, the Judaic law comes first, and the civil law comes second. And so the Pharisee is the person who has, on a regular basis, as part of his normal personality, he has observed the Judaic law above the civil law. And considers, and what happens is that, what happens with most cases, when you have something like this, there's a tendency to be self-righteous. And so you're standing in church, you're nice, you're properly dressed, or in temple, you're nicely dressed, you're properly attired for the way you should be in church, and all of a sudden this person comes in who's probably disheveled. He is a person of the street, he's a person of the world, he's not of the same class as you, and he have a tendency to go look over, and this is what happens in the parable, and say, God, thank you, I'm not this person. And that was essentially the prayer of the Pharisee. The prayer of the publican, and the prayer of the publican does not excuse what the publican has done. It just simply says that God is all merciful, and then He is forgiving of all sins, and no matter what it is. And the publican, doesn't look, because at this time they did have icons and so on and so forth. They had pictures. There was art back then for these things. They approached the temple. They came into the temple. And instead of looking up and having a position, he was basically on the ground, head to the ground, not looking up, and simply said, was sort of upset with himself, saying, God have mercy on me, a sinner. Basically that he's the worst, begging for forgiveness for all the different things he had done. Because, as at the time, the publicans were evil people. These people did a lot of really bad things. And what you see here is you see that God does forgive the publican, and what ends up happening is the Pharisee, who prays in the spirit of self-righteousness, he's basically a self-righteous person. You see the condemnation of self-righteousness, and this is what you have. These two people here actually very nicely represent politicians. You have the upright facade of self-righteousness, but behind the scenes, with this is what you have with the publicans, you have the evil, you have the evil doing. So in other words, the nice authority, the nice face of authority, the proper face of authority, often does its dirty work through the publican, through the bureaucracy. And so you're seeing both sides of the evil coin here biblically presented. One is the lowest person repenting, and the upper person, the authority, not repenting at all, but rather boasting and disconnecting himself from any responsibility that the publican may have taken on, even on behalf of the authority figure. And this plays out throughout the gospel. Matter of fact, this plays out a lot throughout the gospel. People may think that the gospel and the Bible is specifically against the Jews. It's not against the Jews in terms of the race of Jews, in terms of Hebrews. Is against Jews in the Bible is specifically referenced to a particular class of Hebrew. These were the upper class people. These are people who were particularly in positions of authority, and refers to Jews in the sense of those who had authority within the Judaic, we'll call the Judaic law. And these were the Levites. These were the Kohanes. These are the priests. There are a variety of different of positions, including Pharisees and other lawyers, in addition to the rabbinical class. The rabbinical class was a separate class from everything else. So. And what you see today of the Jewish history, what has remained is only the rabbinical class. The rabbinical class is the only surviving structure of the Judaic history, and you'll see it in the names. You'll see the name Cohen. If you see a name like Cohen or a name like Levi or Levite, those are actually classes of Jewish people. But those classes aren't actually there anymore. They're not there. They've kind of disappeared in history. So, and then we see the same thing again in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 25 to 37, in the Good Samaritan here. And what you have in the Good Samaritan is you have both the priest, or the Kohen and the Levite, seeing a Jewish person badly beaten on the road, and instead of stopping to help, they walk on by. You see these are people who are official. They're in high places. They see someone beaten up on the road, they just walk by. And who ends up stopping to help? And when people don't necessarily understand this, is you have the Good Samaritan. A lot of people don't understand this. The Samaritan is the lowest class of person. They are a low-level person within Jewish society. Matter of fact, they are the equivalent of the untouchables in Indian society. So if you know about the untouchables, if you know about deletes in Indian society in terms of the caste system, well, this is what the Samaritan is. So what happens, you have a person who is of no class, of no particular stature, stopping to help someone who is of a particular stature. And you have the people who are of stature simply ignoring and walking away. And this is what you actually see in politics. Politics is like this. And this is very well reflected in the U.S. midterm election in terms of what you see in terms of the outcome of the election. What you saw was a Republican sweep. And the Republicans tend to be a little self-righteous in their acts. But they're different from the Democrats, who have absolutely no moral values whatsoever. The Democrats have publicly stated, by saying that they have alternative morals, have given up on all of their morals and said that it doesn't matter what morals you have, we accept everything. In other words, they're fully open. And the thing is, with a person like that, they'll say a lot of things, but they don't actually mean it because they don't have to mean it. They can say anything they want in order to get elected. Republicans, even though they are self-righteous, have really stuck to a core set of principles, a core set of morality, and with that type of person, you can actually deal with them a lot better than you can with a Democrat who says and feels that there is no particular moral value or reason to do anything. If someone doesn't have a moral value, you can't have them do something on a moral basis. You can't say, well, you know what, I think this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing this. You can say that to a Republican, and a Republican, if you get enough people saying this, will back down and say, okay, yeah, you're right, this is wrong, we'll change the way we're doing things. But for a Democrat, that doesn't matter because they have no morality. They have no particular moral core. And so this becomes a very difficult thing to deal with, because you don't have that moral backing to say, well, maybe this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing that. And the thing is, enough of this was going on throughout the Obama got elected. Then you had Obama and the Democrats had control of both the House and Senate. They were doing so many bad things that it shocked the American public. So first, in 2014, between 2010 and 2014, they lost the House. And now, in 2014, they lost the Senate as well. In other words, so the Democrats have lost control of both the House and the Senate. In other words, they've lost complete control of Congress. forcing Obama either into a lame duck situation or to do things by bypassing the Congress through executive order. And Obama is actually on record, and we'll go through this and we'll take a look at this, that Obama is on record that he will use executive order to bypass the Congress on a regular basis, more often than any other president in the history of the United States. So, with that, we're going to come back in the next segment. We're going to continue on with our top level headlines here. We're going to talk a little bit more about evil, and we're going to show some of the psychology of how this actually plays out, and we'll show how it plays out in the midterm election and how it plays out in the crisis that is going on in the Middle East now with ISIS and what's going on in Iraq, what's going on in Afghanistan, and where things can kind of sort of play out, how they will play out. Anyways, we'll be back in the next segment with the more detail here. We'll go into let's go sort of the psychology of evil. There is actually a lot of psychology out there for this, so see you in the next segment. All right, take it easy and all right.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Well, welcome back to the third segment of Headlines and Beyond, and we're talking about evil and politicians, and how politicians and world leaders have often been viewed as evil, even as far back as at times of Christ. In other words, you can see evil within authority, written biblically, and Christ was, in many ways, if you don't want to look at the Bible as a Christian thing, you don't have to, because the Bible actually has, in terms of the gospel, has something that I think most politicians would fear. Christ was actually quite a rabble rouser, because he was anti-establishment. He was there particularly to knock down authority. He was always challenging authority and the position of authority, in their assumptions on that they had the right, in the divine right, to rule. And anyway, people say why he came as the Lord, and he has all these titles and stuff like that. And he came as was born into the world into a low level, calling himself Lord, because he actually, and this is looking at Christ the person, Christ the human being, without considering the theological implications of this. He looked at things. He looked at authority as being self-righteous and evil. You have the self-righteous face of the politician. You have the self-righteous face of the leader, looking and pretending to be good. But all the evil was done and carried out through the public and through the bureaucracy, through the government apparatus. So the politician could, in many cases, keep his fingers clean and always keep his... Well, it wasn't me, it was my people down there. They kind of got out of control and, they burned an entire village down. So it's not my fault, I just couldn't control them. We hear this today. All you have to do is look at Abu Ghraib. Abu Ghraib, the whole thing of the scandal. Wow, it wasn't really the hierarchy. It wasn't the president. He wasn't really involved in this. These were low-level people who really ran out of control. Same argument. 2,000 years later. So Christ actually, was a rabble rouser, if you will. He was an independent. He said that everybody was equal, that there were no kings above us, no slaves below us. He really was an anti-establishment type of person, and that's why he was executed. We were looking at the execution of Christ, the crucifixion of Christ. Crucifixion was an execution; it was a form of execution. Why was he executed? Why was he crucified? Simple, because he was a rabble rouser. He threatened authority. He got to the point where the authorities have had enough. He was creating enough havoc that the authorities needed to put a stop to him, because he was there destroying authority. He was destroying the rules that had been set up. And he was destroyed. He was executed as, he was executed as a figure of anti-establishment. He was as a revolutionary. And the thing is that if we can follow this line, we can sort of see this in the Republican election in this 2014 the gubernatorial 2014 midterm election, which included the gubernatorial races, the races for governorship, which also had a Republican sweep as well. And it wasn't the typical Republican sweep, even though they had sort of, in many ways, say they had, gotten the control of the whole Tea Party issue. They really hadn't, because while they got a hold, and they were able to get out a number of the Tea Party people running, the actual platform that the people got elected on, the new senators, the new governors, and they did sweep the governors, they did sweep the Congress. The new people were elected on the Tea Party platform. In other words, there wasn't any particular platform that they were elected on. They were each elected individually for different reasons in different states. But they were there specifically in terms of the overall message. It was they want to stop the Democrats. They had enough of this loose, no moral environment that said you can do anything, it doesn't really matter. But the thing is, so we're going to actually look into this whole thing about, and this is what we're talking in a second, talking about the psychology of evil. And that we've actually have significant studies coming, particularly out of Stanford University, showing that evil does exist. And that even very moral people can be so intimidated by the evil authority around them that they fail to act to protect the innocent. And this was brought out by an infamous Stanford experiment, which studied the effect of prisoners and guards. If you gave people enough authority without the proper, then they say without the proper oversight, but they don't know if there's any proper oversight, because they actually set up with the professor, the scientist, the psychologist named Philip Zimbardo. He set up the controls. This was supposed to be a controlled experiment in a controlled environment. He set up the controls with an overhead figure, with an authority figure that would oversee the prison. And what happened? Within 3 days, the experiment had to be shut down because the experiment had spun out of control. The guards, and they were of no particular background, no particular, they really chose them at random, became sadistic. They began torturing the there's no other word, but they began torturing the student prisoners. And these were students in this experiment here. There was a psychology experiment. So all the participants were students. And a lot of times students, when they pay in order to pay for their college, they volunteer. They not really volunteer. They get hired as a subject in an experiment, usually a psychology experiment. But there's other experiments that you can get involved in, that you can get paid for, and you can become a human guinea pig, if you will. And this was the result. The result was these guys who have no particular background, of no particular, they had been psychologically screened to make sure that these people were sort of average and not sadistic, that they weren't psychopaths. And what happens within 3 days, the authority that was given to them turned them into psychopaths. And the thing is, the professor who was overseeing this, who put himself in the position of authority, who said, "Well, I'm the scientist, I'm controlling everything here," didn't realize what was happening to him until someone came to him and said, "Hey, you've got to stop. This isn't right. These kids here are getting some of the kids did get hurt." And some of them many of the kids had mental breakdowns. They had severe mental health issues afterwards, and the effect was long lasting. It was a very dangerous effect. There was another person in New York named Stanley Milgram who wanted to see if the evil they saw in Auschwitz in Hitler's Germany was something that was specific to Hitler, or was it something in German society, or was it something general to society? So he set up an experiment that does the exact same thing, that sort of tests the person's ability to be sadistic. And what he found out is that good people, people who have moral values, even though they may object to things, if the authority is insistent, they'll turn off the morality and go along with the experiment even though they know what's going on is wrong. In other words, moral people will not stand up and do the moral thing if they feel that they're threatened or their job or whatever. In other words, if they can let the moral choice go to an authority figure, then the authority figure can push the moral person to do immoral things. In this case, evil things as well. And in many cases, I'll show you later on, we'll get into this, we'll show how immorality is fundamentally evil, and we'll see how this works itself back into society again. And then it's actually, a lot of this effect actually has a legitimate psychological effect called the Lucifer effect. And Lucifer is the devil, he's Satan, and this, ironically enough, for people who don't believe in the soul, although the soul is the psyche, it's Greek for soul. Psyche or psychology is Greek for soul study. Psychology is a Greek study for studying the soul, and yet many psychologists don't believe in the soul. So they've fundamentally contradicted themselves. But that's another point. And we see this in Iraq, and we're talking about Abu Ghraib. We saw this in with the creation of ISIS, and the thing is, John McCain did create ISIS. ISIS is not a what we see in Syria and now in Iraq. They didn't come out of nowhere. They were funded by John McCain, and you can see John McCain on CNN moralizing how we should fund these so-called Syrian freedom fighters. Well, there are no freedom fighters in Syria. They're all jihadists. And so what we see all this a couple of years later, when we were watching, McCain on news saying, on CNN saying, we need to fund these people. These people are, they're being attacked by Assad. We need to get rid of Assad. And then some of that became a line, the general line on TV is we have to get rid of Assad. And this was agreed on by both the Republicans and the Democrats. Something that the Republicans and Democrats aligned on. Yeah. But what actually was going on? What was going on is they were funding ISIS. They were creating a revolution on the ground. They were creating discontent. And if you go into history, you'll find the answer. What you'll see is that one of the best ways to get control over oil or any resource is to create chaos in that country. In other words, you create dissension, you create fighting. You do what you do in what you see in Africa. Africa is exactly this. You fund all sorts of different groups and arm them with money and weapons, and they start fighting each other. As they fight each other, you go in and you take their oil or gold or whatever it is. We saw this in Kosovo. And who was involved in Kosovo, Syria, and in Africa? William Hague. He's one of the conservative politicians in the United Kingdom, and he's involved in all of them. Where is William Hague? He's associated with Royal Dutch Shell, with an oil company. So what's going on in Syria is, if you've been reading, going beyond the headlines, going behind the headlines, you'll find that they found oil in Syria. So a lot of what's going on in Syria right now and in Iraq is a fight over oil. It's an oil fight. And you have all your different international players and different international groups lining up, and they're fighting over oil. And this is, of course, fundamentally evil. Because you see what's going on the ground there. It is fundamentally evil. But you have your politicians standing up and saying, very self-righteously saying, that this is a moral thing to do. They're presenting a moral face to this. This is the Republican side of this. It is not moral. And so what you see is both sides, no matter how you look at it, whether one does have some degree of morality, and that's the Republicans, and Democrats have no degree of morality whatsoever, either side, from their own perspective, they approach it and they are fundamentally evil. They do evil things, whether they're doing it directly or indirectly. And this is what we see in society. We see this in society, and it comes up further when we go into our next segment here, our last segment, and we'll look at what happened in Ontario, what's been happening here in Ontario, and its lead into socialism. And we'll see that you have the premier of Ontario trying to sexualize children with graphic sexual education. And you look at what they're doing, and if you understand the psychology of what's going on, you have a background in psychology, and you have particularly a background in sexual abuse, you'll understand that the sexual education proposal put forward by Kathleen Wynne, now Premier, and way back when she was I think Minister for Education, she did the same thing in 2010. Her attempt at sexualization is essentially meets the definition of a pedophile. That this is a person who is interested in educating and teaching kids about sex, that she's interested in sexualizing them. And this is exactly what a pedophile does. A pedophile educates children about sex. And we'll talk about that when we come back in the next segment. All right. See you then.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Well, welcome back to the last segment of Headlines and Beyond. And as you see, we're getting into things that are in a rather more in-depth manner than your standard headline presentation. And this is just the introduction. This is an introductory segment. And it's not part of our regular Tuesday, Thursday, and weekend broadcast, our show. And so we will be doing that. We're coming back. There'll be another one. There'll be 3 more episodes this week, because there'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Tuesday, Thursday, and the weekend. And so this will be 4 episodes during this week. The introductory, this one here, and the 3 regulars. And we were talking about the psychology of evil, and we had gotten into the discussion about pedophilia and pedophiles, and how pedophiles educate their victims, so that the pedophiles don't specifically. If you look at the history of pedophilia, talk to some pedophiles, they don't believe that what they're doing is wrong. They believe that people are sexual beings, and that you can achieve sexual consent with a child, with a minor, and that there's no fundamental issue. That this is simply, well, you're just moralizing about this. This is simply Christian morality, and this is their point. The view is they don't view this as wrong. And Kathleen Wynne has a history of this. You can see this, that she has a history in this. She did this. She introduced just 2 weeks ago. Well, no, about a week ago, the second week of November, she introduced a new sexual education program for Ontario. She had done this in 2010. It's basically the same program that she had introduced in 2010 when she was minister under the Dalton gang. The Dalton gang. If you look at the history of Dalton McGuinty in the Liberal Party in Ontario, you'll see that they've ripped the taxpayer off. You know, in terms of tax fraud, there's billions of dollars missing. In other words, billions of dollars missing, not millions or thousands. Billions of dollars missing and unaccounted for. And that's why I can appropriately call them the Dalton gang. And Kathleen Wynne was a part of the Dalton gang. And in 2010, she tried to come out with a very graphic sexual education program. This is exactly what a pedophile would do. In other words, her curriculum, the sexual education curriculum, would match exactly what a pedophile would be doing to a child if he was sexualized. In other words, by definition, she is a pedophile, because she's doing exactly what a pedophile would do: educate children on sex and how to be sexual. And this is exactly what's going on in this now. Well, back then, there are limits. See, Canadians are really different, fundamentally different, in that they don't really stand up for them. Canadians don't stand up for themselves that often. It is very rare that a Canadian will stand up and say, this is wrong. But what's happened is you've had a group of people, now, and I will introduce them in the next segment more appropriately, because I didn't bring the notes in here. There's a group that is now sent out on a position to stop stop the premier, to stop the sexual education program. But what they didn't do, and because this person is a socialist, he is a part of the teachers union, I'm assuming, because he identifies himself as a early childhood educator. And he doesn't understand he's part of the problem. Socialism is, and this is where the Democrats have done this, and most liberals have done this, and the NDP have done this, because they are all socialists. Socialism is particularly on the communist side, there's two forms of socialism. There's communist on the left and Nazism on the right. Nazism is primarily, they're your nationalists, they're very patriotic, and they're all about patriotism. Communists are very wishy-washy, they're, we call you bleeding heart liberals, and they always talk about being open and accepting everything as equal, being tolerant. And this includes stuff that is extremely evil, extremely bad for you, and then it's extremely destructive. And this is the case here with Kathleen Wynne, and this is in the teachers in the Ontario school system, is that there is an embodiment of evil within the union that has left children open to being sexualized in a very pedophile manner. And there is no other way of saying this, that these people, because they're doing this in a pedophile manner, that they are pedophiles. So you have a premier, an entire party, in a socialist system that is very pedophilic. They believe in in pedophilia. They believe there's nothing wrong with sexual contact with children. And this is, a lot of times, the social point to Sweden, they'll point to Scandinavia and say, well, look. And Scandinavia is known for its pedophiles. Is known for having graphic sexual interactions with children. Is known for this. It's famous, from the social perspective, it's famous for this. Scandinavia is famous for having open sexual relationship with children. Is known, it's a known quantity. And the thing is that people will say, well, you know, go on Wikipedia and look at the whole list of pedophile activist organizations. And you'll find a very small list of pedophile activist organizations. And you'll see the word defunct next to them. And defunct means no longer in effect or in use, not operating or not functioning. And the argument is presented, well, you know what, these pedophile organizations, they don't really exist anymore. That's over with. That was in the 1970s. They don't really exist. But that's misleading, because defunct doesn't mean they don't exist anymore. Activist organizations exist for a particular purpose. They exist to change the views in society as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And if an organization achieves its objective and creates an environment where now a view that they were active on, which wasn't acceptable, is now acceptable, there's no need for the organization anymore, because the view, the perspective, is now acceptable. And what were these pedophile organizations trying to do? They were trying to say that sexual contact between adults and children is normal, that children are, and people are, sexual beings. And this has been accepted. Look at the media. Look what goes on the media. Look at Rihanna. Look at all of the so-called pop stars, the teen pop stars. They're all sexual. Look at the dolls. It's all about sex. And you have this massive sexualization of children in society, and it's accepted. It's now accepted as normal. And this is what this whole thing is, that Kathleen Wynne and the teachers union think this is normal. They're surprised. They don't understand why people are opposed to this. And so what you see here, there's no need for an activist organization when something's been accepted. And so these defunct organizations are defunct. Why? Because it's been accepted as normal. And there are very few people who will stand up. And the thing is, they do have a position right now. Within 2 weeks, they got 17,500 people to sign a petition against the sexualization of kids in school. But the thing is, what's going to happen is the teachers are going to work around it. And that's what's been happening. Even though the sexual education officially didn't get into the schools. In activist schools and specialized activist schools, and with activist teachers, it got in. So officially it's not in, and what Kathleen Wynne is trying to do is bring it in officially. And even if it's defeated officially, that doesn't mean that the sexual education program is not going to be brought in unofficially. And of course, this isn't mentioned by anybody. And what happens is this person who is a teacher, who is bringing up this issue up, he's not blaming the union. He's not putting the fault with the union, because the unions did not stand up to this. As a matter of fact, the unions who are socialists have no issue with this. This is not a union issue. When I know of teachers who have stood up against this stuff and brought this attention to the union told them to shut up and sit down. In other words, when they were supposed to be backed by the unions, and the unions said, "Oh yeah, we back our teachers." Well, no, they don't. They back the teachers only when the unions feel it's appropriate for their own particular views. If they're protecting a union view, then yeah, they'll protect the teacher. If the teacher is not within the union's perspective, within their views on how things should be, they don't protect the teacher. They don't protect their own union members. And the thing is, I've heard teachers talk about union reprisals, sweatings. In other words, the unions are not open and free. They're very dictatorial. And if you do not agree with their groupthink, then you're either, in many cases, you're fired and pushed out. They will fire teachers. They'll let teachers go if you're not within that groupthink. Or the only time they actually even really let teachers go, in terms of firing themselves, is when they're pushed to. So if you have someone who is not following the line not being not following the line of solidarity, they're not being part of the union, they'll let the person go. They'll kick the person out. Or they'll have other punishments for them. If they've been caught and they're publicly branded as pedophiles, then. But otherwise, they'll do what the Catholic Church did, and they'll move the teacher around from school to school to school to school. Doesn't matter how many complaints that there are, the teacher will always keep his job, they'll always keep his pension, he'll keep his salary, and there's no issue. They simply move it around. They shift the person around from school to school to school. Until they can't keep the person anymore. But usually they find a way of keeping the person. And this is participation in pedophilia. This is participation in protection of pedophiles. This is the sexualization of children. This is what happens to socialism. And therefore, the only conclusion you can draw is that now Ontario has a pedophile premier and pedophile teachers. Because if the union wants to cover everybody with a generalized blanket, and as we showed in the Stanford experiment, good people who are moral people cannot stand up in this environment and do what's right, then what ended up happening is you have an environment that is fundamentally evil, even if there are good people in there. And this is what's happening with the unions, the premier, the socialist systems. They're all evil. And they're openly evil because they don't have to have the morality that a person who claims to be Christian or have a moral background has. They can do anything they want to do. Everything is good. And then there is actually a phrase for it. It's all good. And you'll hear socialists, you'll hear a lot of activists who are on the socialist side of things say, "Oh, it's all good." They'll agree with anything. You can't pin them down to a position because they agree with anything. And so what happens is that when you have something like that, you can't change their mind because they don't have a mind. You can't change their position because they don't have a position. And the only thing to do, and what I do, is instead of being polite about it, say what you see. What do I see with Kathleen Wynne? What do I see with the teachers in the teachers union? I see pedophiles. They meet the definition of pedophiles. They're doing what a pedophile would do. That makes them pedophiles. So we have Ontario's pedophile premier and pedophile teachers. Are there good teachers? Yeah. Are there good politicians? Yeah. But they can't stand up for what's right, and this has been shown in the Stanford University experiment. It's also been shown in the Stanley Milgard experiments. This is well known, and this has a psychological background to this. And what we're producing now is we're producing a generation of kids. We're going back into the sort of Nazi society. And the Nazi society was a type of society where you could do evil things like what we saw in Auschwitz, because you had a psychopathic society. You had a society that did not understand what was going on was wrong. The moral fabric that would have said to the German society, hey, this is wrong, we cannot be doing this, was removed. It wasn't there. And we are in the same situation now. The moral fabric that was supposed to be there in the schools, protecting the children, is no longer there. And it's because of the liberals, it's because of the NDP, because of the socialists, because of the teachers union, no longer have the moral capacity to say, this is wrong. Anyways, this is what we have for today. This is the end of our introductory headlines and beyond. I will see you in the next headlines and beyond in about 1 to 2 days from now. It depends on when I can film and get all the notes together. Anyways, the ending part here, this is my moniker. This is how I identify myself. That's what the ending segment is. The last, we'll call it ending theme, if you will. Anyways, have a good one. I will see you in the next episode of Headlines and Beyond. All right. Goodbye.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian.
I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.